Hey everyone, this is Vincent Shkreli from the Daily Caller News Foundation. I'm here with comedian Jamie Kilstein. How you doing?
Hey, I was doing what I'm assuming all Daily Caller guests were doing, which is I was watching a Greta Gerwig interview about Little Women while eating vegan macaroni and cheese.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
I'm not trying to relate to your audience too hard off the bat, but yeah, I'm doing pretty good.
Oh, awesome. So, what's it called? It actually got me a little hungry now. I want some macaroni and cheese. But I want bacon in it. You gotta have bacon, you know?
That's what we just fight about for the next 45 minutes.
So what got you involved in the comedy? When did you start, get into doing stand-up? What brought you into getting involved, especially in, politics in general, mixing comedy and politics at the same time?
Yeah, a terrible sense of business is probably what got me to do that. And I was obsessed with stand-up growing up, and I also was obsessed with music. So, there was literally a conversation I had with my poor father where he was, trying to convince me to go to college and was like, what if comedy falls through? You need a backup plan? And I very earnestly was like, I play in a band, Dad. I have a back. We're fine. And so I was, super excited about my band when I was, 16. And then I was like, all right, guys, so now, we can talk about touring and merch and stuff like that. And then they were like, we have to go to college. And, one of them was like, I'm going to serve in Iraq. And I was like, but our jam band. And so I just, I was always the weird artist guy who took everything a little too far. When other people were like, cool, this phase is over. I'm like, but we have to take it all the way, I wanted to get our backyard wrestling tape to I'm like, we have to get this to Vince McMahon. And they're like, we're just jumping on a trampoline. And so I started when I was 17. And then, it's funny. I used to go overseas a lot when I was really political, and it wasn't popular to be political, like it kind of is now. And all of those newspapers would compare me to Carlin and Bill Hicks, and it wasn't because I was that good. It was because I was an American comedian talking about politics. And to me, whenever I was asked, was your comedy influenced by those guys? It wasn't. My politics was influenced by them. So, it's interesting. I mean, Carlin has said a bunch of stuff that would piss off the left and the right nowadays. Richard Pryor would be canceled probably for the stuff he talked about. But back then, it was just, I didn't know if they were Democrats. I didn't know if they were liberals. It wasn't partisan. It was here are these comics using this art I love, this kind of subversive art, to take down establishments.
Yeah.
So today, that establishment could be PC Hollywood. That establishment could be still the church. It could still be Washington. But that's what I really loved about it. So I actually got into politics through comedy. I wasn't a political science major who then did stand-up. I haven't said one thing about the fucking impeachment on my podcast or on stage because I don't care. And I think it's ridiculous. So I try not to focus on that stuff. Larger issues and themes politically are kind of what interest me.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a Lenny Bruce style, because you mentioned Carlin and Pryor. They were two of his, at the time when Lenny Bruce was getting in trouble for saying things on stage.
Yeah.
He wasn't he wasn't into politics at first. He was just doing regular comedy in the 50s, and then he got into politics later on. So
right.
It's that's the whole scenario.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about that is I just did this Quillette podcast on the Ricky Gervais comedy, people getting offended kind of scandal or whatever. And I was interviewing this guy named Paul Provenza who gave me my first TV spot, and he made that movie The Aristocrats, which was the one about the most offensive joke in the world.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Lenny Bruce, and he was saying that back then colleges were where you wanted to play, and the young kids were the counterculture. They were the ones protesting the Vietnam War and, doing drugs and really like railing against the system. And now it seems to have switched where a lot of the more liberal colleges are the ones that you can't really say as much. Yeah. And it's interesting. It's like totally flipped around.
Yeah. There's a way of breaking through the Puritan lifestyle, and now it's become you can't make comedy Puritan. It's like now I feel it's the PC police have tried to do that with comedy,
Yeah, and I mean, I go back and forth with that because you're right, and people are being canceled, and I one of the most ridiculous examples I think was Kevin Hart getting fired from the Oscars because it's like you dug 10 years into the past to find a problematic tweet that this like young black guy who has risen through the ranks and inspired a bunch of people just to be like, we got you, right? Mm-hmm. If Kevin Hart said, I can't wait to host the Oscars tomorrow, I hope there aren't any gay people, then I'd be like, all right, maybe remove him. Yeah. But the fact that people are digging to try to cancel comedians, that makes me feel like it's disingenuous. What I will say, though, is that I also think that some people exaggerate it because there is still a huge audience, I would even say a bigger audience, for edgy, offensive comedy that also exists. And so for me, it's like, talk about whatever you want, but just be good, right? There's a difference between talking about edgy topics and just being an asshole, right? Yeah. Like, there's a difference between a really smart gay joke or talking about homophobia or whatever and just being like, hey, look at that guy in the front row. What a queer. It's like, all right, well, Jesus. So I think that, like, there's a balance, and what the people on the left don't realize is the more they try to censor people and the more they try to get people fired for comedy they don't like, the more the pushback is going to be. So, like, after Shane Gillis got fired from SNL, I had never heard anyone use that derogatory term for Asians until that happened, because comics, they weren't suddenly racist. They were just so pissed off that this comic who made a joke and was making fun of a racist got fired that suddenly comics are like, oh, I want to double down. I want to use that word. I want to, like, be risky. And it was just happening in conversation and on podcasts. But, like, you can't push comics too far in the other direction because they will rebel hard. Mm-hmm. And if you're really trying to make comedy a nicer place, I think it's going to backfire.
Mm-hmm. How is it, like, to be somebody preoccupied with social justice and also being a comedian at the same time? There's kind of like I would say, a stalemate that a comedian faces, where it's you're for a social justice movement, but then when you crack a joke, you're walking on eggshells because you don't want to offend or say anything. Like, a lot of people on the left don't understand the separation. They conflate, the joke with somebody's preoccupation.
Yeah. Like, so I went through that where, I mean, look, social justice is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Being a douchebag on Twitter is not a good thing. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the people who are the loudest on Twitter aren't actually, and this is for the right and the left, aren't actually doing anything to further those causes. They're just trying to get people in trouble and kind of virtue signal that they're more liberal than other people. Like, I've said this on podcasts before, but, like, I was the kind of guy who, when I was doing that, someone would be like, Jamie, your mom's on the phone. And I would be like, tell her I can't talk. I'm tweeting about feminism, like, where, like, people, they don't really care. They're just trying to get their social media likes and retweets and new followers. So when I started comedy, when I started making like a name for myself, it was really political and it was left wing, but it was like super edgy. Like, any word you're not supposed to say that I wouldn't say now, I said it. Now, I said it from a left-wing point of view, or I would say it in the voice of a bigot or whatever, but like all them hard-hitting words that get people canceled, like they're on old albums of mine. When I was sort of being talked about as this like left-wing, this big left-wing comic. And I like that because to me that was, I'm going to be funny first, which includes being shocking, which includes being jarring, and saying offensive things, but my heart's in the right place because I'm saying these offensive things while saying that I don't want troops to die in Iraq, or while saying that gay people should have equal rights, or whatever. But then it got to a point where it wasn't popular to be political, kind of post 9/11 George Bush. And so I started making my living overseas in like the UK and Australia and stuff. And because I wasn't getting booked here in the States, I started to get a much more political following than a comedy following because I wasn't getting gigs. So as my following got more political, and then my ex-wife started writing for The Nation, so then we started getting all these like Nation readers and less comedy fans. Now my language started to get policed more. So now I would get emails being like, I appreciate your stance on George Bush, but you can't say that. Or I would get emails that like, I remember once I helped some guy lose a bunch of weight because his doctor said he was dying. And so I got him into like jujitsu and like eating vegetarian and stuff. And people said that me doing that was fat shaming them. Like it just got to the most, dude, it was horrible. I mean, this guy wrote me an email and was like, I lost all this weight. My doctor's so proud. I just entered my first like white belt jiu-jitsu competition. My kids like are really proud of me. And I read the email on the show, like almost in tears, where I'm like, oh, my miserable life is worth it. And then the next day, I got like probably like 10 emails that said, no, I wasn't like, if you're fat, you know, this guy's better than you because he's not fat anymore. I just read this really cool story of this guy who pulled himself up and did the thing he wanted to do. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, my side's kind of full of shit too. Where people just don't want to be criticized. And maybe the right does kind of have a point when they say that, you know, we just want things handed to us or whatever. So anyway, so to get back to your actual question, once my audience became that political, and I didn't really question it because I was like the white straight guy, and I'm like, we're not really allowed to question it. So when people would say, don't say that, I would kind of go, all right, sorry. I did find myself, instead of writing jokes that I thought were funny, I would be like, okay, what's a political topic I haven't talked about? I guess I got to do a set on veganism. I guess I have to do an abortion joke. I guess I have to do this. And so as opposed to now where like something will make me laugh and I go, that's what I'm going to talk about on stage because it's funny. And sometimes it's political and sometimes it's not. Same with my podcast. Sometimes it's political. Sometimes it's not. It seems so much more authentic to me instead of being like, oh my God, how can I do this LA showcase if I don't have a Donald Trump joke? You know, I almost think that's kind of hacky. My one Donald Trump joke is talking about how funny he is because I think it's hacky. Everyone's just doing, you know, orange hair jokes or whatever. And it's like, even if I loved Donald, or even if I was being more political, I just don't want to talk about the things everyone's talking about. And so right now you're just seeing a bunch of like bad political comedy.
Do you wish for there to be a revival of apolitical humor, like apolitical comedy? Or like...
Well, there still is. I mean, that's what people don't understand about comedy because what's in the news is like Chappelle pissing off liberals or whatever, but like all forms of comedy still exist. Like Rogan and Bill Burr and Chappelle are calling out the left and doing a great job about it. Jim Gaffigan is still talking about Hot Pockets. Mike Birbiglia just did this whole show about having a baby. John Mulaney just did a kids special for Netflix, which is one of the smartest comedy things I've ever seen. So like you can still get it.
Mm-hmm.
What I don't like is, and I went through it and I'm watching other people go through it, comedians feeling like, oh, I guess if I don't comment on the impeachment, I'm going to get in trouble. Or if
because then they'll give like suspicion. They would say, oh, are you a supporter of Trump or something if you're not making fun of him?
Yeah, or like even if you, like I have I guess I do have a pro-gun joke. I mean, I used to have a rant that was literally called Fuck the NRA. And now I have a pro-gun joke because I moved to the South and I met a bunch of people who have guns, and some are liberal and some are conservative. And I'm like, oh, you guys would protect me way more than any of my LA friends would have. Like, we would have all died if there was like a terrorist attack. And I have a whole bit about it. And to me as a comic, that's what you're supposed to do. I'm like, what's something that actually challenges one of my beliefs? Like, that to me is so much more interesting than, I mean, shit, so many conservatives don't like Trump. It's the easiest thing to do. And also, like, people are going to comedy clubs because they're sick of fighting on Facebook. Yeah. So to show up at this club, which is supposed to be kind of edgy or subversive, and just hearing the same garbage you were fighting about, you know, with your aunt and uncle on Twitter or whatever, it's just a bummer.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain the feeling of, like, being blacklisted or outcasted by, especially people that you thought were your friends? Because I know it comes to a point in well, not every comedian's life, but people in general have it, but especially a comedian, like when you, usually it's for the part where if a comedian says a joke and then they become blacklisted, but like just how, like the feeling of it, the being, you know, all alone, where you have nobody to go, and you get, you know, you would get phone calls from people that you didn't know were your actual friends, and just the feeling of it, you know?
Yeah. It was horrible. It was the worst. And it also, I mean, to start off positively, you know, the last part of your question was really interesting, was I got so wrapped up in cancel culture before it was cool. I was like the hipster. And I felt like I failed as a stand-up. So I kind of started to turn my back on stand-up. And when I did get blacklisted, all of my political friends, the ones who, you know, would ask me for favors, the ones, and just, you know, if anyone was curious, I literally got blacklisted for having consensual one-night stands and cheating once like an idiot before we tried like an open relationship. So like we were gonna be it's insane. It's literally, it's nothing that comedians haven't talked about. There was nothing gropey or gross or whatever. But because I was this self-righteous, you know, was proclaimed as some male feminist guy, people could go, ha, 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 and they turned it into this thing that it wasn't. And so, look, if I was accused of rape and my liberal friends didn't want to call me, cool. Like, I get that, right? If I went on some, like, N-word tirade, like, understandable. But this was so crazy because it was progressive journalists who would joke around with me when we were talking about, like, sleeping around. It was people who hit on me. It was, you know, people who I was really close with. And from the liberal point of view, it was people who spend all day tweeting about self-care and depression and stuff like that. And I'd been suicidal before this. And then I disappeared. And the people who reached out to me weren't the progressive, forgive everybody second chance liberals who, you know, would call me when they wanted to get on MSNBC. But it was Rogan, it was Doug Stanhope, it was all of these edgy, offensive comics who get demonized in the media a lot of times, but in real life are really great people who actually, I mean, Joe and I weren't even friends because we had a big fight about feminism, and he reached out to make sure I was alive. And and then I went on his show after like I disappeared for like a year or two. But so that was really, that showed me that comics, even the ones who seem, mean and crazy on stage, we're all misfits and we're all broken and we look out for each other, right? What's hilarious is like Bill Cosby was the one who was lecturing everybody about language and who was lecturing about, pulling your pants up and whatever. And that dude was just like off raping everybody. Mm-hmm. But these really offensive comics, quote unquote, that get demonized, a lot of them are really great people. So that was kind of the only thing that was good about it. Other than that, was 100% suicidal. I still deal with it. I mean, I had a gig canceled recently because all it takes is one person or one headline that's phrased nefariously that makes it look like I did something or was even accused of something worse than I was. And people are just kind of scared to touch it. I would make $1 bazillion if I went full right wing and was like, here are all the things with the left. And I do on my podcast, I criticize the left every day, but I'm still pretty liberal, which puts me in this kind of like bizarre purgatory. I'm happier now than I've ever been, not having to be around those kind of people who are just miserable, and you can't even be like, hey, I like this movie, without them being like, that movie's problematic, and you're like, shit, like just let me enjoy something. I'm way happier. I hang out with fighters now mainly who are kind of apolitical. I'm healthier than I've ever been, but I can't let myself get bitter. I've seen people who have been blacklisted get bitter. And that's kind of been the thing that's sort of saved me is I'm like, how can I be positive? And that means going on more conservative shows, which I never did before. That means reading more conservative publications. And not because I'm mad at the left, but because I talked so long on the left about being open-minded, and now so many people on the left are not open-minded. So I honestly, I'm a happier, better person for it. But man, it still sucks and it still affects me. And there are people who still don't want me to make a living and will, at any time I get a paid gig, try to get it taken away. And that's a scary feeling. There's not a lot you can do about it except try to be the best person you can. Every club I go to goes, God, you were so nice and respectful and funny. I'm like, I know that. So that's kind of all you can do is keep trying to be a good person. And then slowly, hopefully, the tides change. And if it doesn't, in a year, you'll see me with a best-selling book that's like, women are liars. And I'll be rich and it'll be great.
So, that's what I was even thinking about, though. I mean, a comedian should always be in the middle. You're supposed to mock both sides. Yeah. And it's kind of like the same thing with if you're a writer or an artist, because you're analyzing both sides, and you're not taking the foundation of one particular ideology, but yeah, I mean, you don't have to do anything. That's what's great about comedy, and that's what's great about art. But good comedy, I think, can attack themselves. Just because I'm liberal doesn't mean that I have to make fun of Republicans or have to make fun of liberals. Mm-hmm. To me, that's just more interesting. I would rather, my whole gun chunk now, I have a big chunk making fun of the extremes on the left who want to take all the guns. And then I have a chunk making fun of people who want to arm teachers. And what's cool about that too is when you do make fun of both sides, you get the other side to listen to, because they don't feel attacked. Mm-hmm. So if I open up making fun of the liberals who have never shot a gun before, then when I make fun of the arm the teachers thing, the conservatives will go, oh, well, this isn't really an agenda. He's showing both sides. And that to me is really interesting. But man, I mean, if you are truly passionate about left-wing cause or about a right-wing cause, of course you're going to write about that, even if you're a comedian. But
I think what you're seeing and what neither of us are fans of is if there are no jokes and you're just laying out your agenda and you're just going, racism's bad. It's like, well, right. We all think racism's bad. They go, oh, but conservatives. It's like, no, conservatives also think racism is bad. Racism is bad. Where's the joke? Where's the turn? What's making me think? Even when I was like super liberal, I used to have a bit. I forget the exact joke, but the bit was about liberal racism. And it was about me, the times I felt self-righteous. Like if I was at an airport sometimes, I would catch myself like nodding to like a Muslim family to be like, I got your back. And it's like, that's racist. That's me still being like, I see you're different, but I'm not. I know you're not a terrorist, even though that's in my head right now. Like, so that shit to me is far more interesting than being like, oh, Republicans hate Muslims. It's like, well, no, that's not true. Why don't we take a little turn and talk about the times liberals are trying to be anti-racist and end up being racist because race is complicated and weird, and we need to talk about it more. So like that stuff to me is more interesting than what I used to do, which is like, here are the bullet points I have to hit, here's my agenda, how can I mask it as comedy when it's just kind of yelling at strangers?
Are you having anything, are you like looking to write a new book or anything? I know you wrote one book before, News Fail.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the offers I've had to write a book are kind of wanting me to be the, like, lefty who turned on the left. And, like, people have done that already. And, like, again, I'm still kind of liberal. And, dude, there's also part of me that, like, I'm talking about dating in my act for the first time. This is someone I used to scream about the church. You know how fun it is for me to talk about like a dating app and like kind of hacky talk. Like I've never talked about that on stage. I've never talked about my mom being an alcoholic. Like there are personal things that I've never got to talk about that now that I'm not strapped to this left-wing agenda, I can talk about it. And so part of me is like, do I even want to write that book? Do I want to write a book about like the liberal guy who's being turned away from being liberal, or do I just want to try to be funny on the podcast and funny on stage and then attract an audience? I mean, dude, my podcast listeners, it's like I'll have like gay 16-year-old punk kids and then like a vet that heard me on Glenn Beck. Like that's cool to me. Like and then I get to watch them on like the Patreon, like communicate with each other and give each other advice. And like, when my cat died a couple weeks ago, the people who were writing me were like, at Trump forever and then at I hope Trump dies. Like that to me, I was like seeing humanity in both sides, especially when the old me would have written off another side. I don't know, man. I really like that. And maybe there's a book there. I think right now people are getting off on the extremes. It's a little harder to be nuanced. It's what I'm trying to do. But I think right now, for the first time in my life, the goal has to be funny and be entertaining and listen to people, all different kinds of people, instead of becoming a center-right version of who I was on the left, where, now I'm doing the same things. I'm still yelling at people on Twitter. I'm still, I still have an agenda, but I'm a center-right guy doing it now instead of a super liberal guy. I'm like, I just want to stay happy, I mean, dude, if I could just talk about suicide and depression and that kind of stuff on the podcast, like, I would. I think that's the stuff I've talked about on the podcast that's helped people a lot more than, debate recaps. But I also think that there's no one really talking about politics from my perspective. So I'm trying to make both liberals and conservatives just like a little less douchey is my agenda.
All right. Thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us. That was awesome.
Oh, thanks, man. I hope I didn't talk too much. Can I plug the podcast?
Oh yeah.
Sweet. So the podcast is free on iTunes and Stitcher and Spotify, and it's called the Jamie Kilstein Podcast. And it's just 20 minutes. There's like a longer interview at the end of the week, but it's 20 minutes making fun of the worst of the left and the worst of the right, which is most of them. And then, we bring people together and we'll talk about mental health and, stuff that really matters to me. And it's a really cool community. So all the links are just at jamiekilsteinpodcast.com. And then I'm on Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff.
Sweet. Thank you so much.